how fortunate we are. How fortunate we are. That beautiful gospel, Jesus, the living bread. Jesus, the living bread. And we are here, and we are offered, and we take that bread, which plants in us the total and unconditional love that God has for us. It's all about love. It's all about love. At the minute I'm reading a bit of Julian of Norwich. Some of you may have heard of Julian of Norwich. She was, 700 years ago, she was a nun in Norwich. And she, there was an awful lot, as there has been ever since, this idea of God of judgment. It was a sort of social control, really. That actually, if you did this, then God was going to come and get you. And, we've probably been to some of these blood and thunder sermons, that really tell us that we've got to get ourselves sorted out. Now, this 700 years ago was very much that sort of scene, but Julian of Norwich totally turned it upside down. And what she said was, God is not a God of judgment. God is a God of love. God is a God of love. And the amazing thing is, and this is what comes out, and this is what she was saying, the amazing thing is that the more we can get that, the more we can understand that God is a God of love, not a God of judgment. Miraculously, if we can get that in our heads, miraculously, the more sinless, the more loving we become. It's somehow or other getting that notion in our head that we're loved so much that we become sinless, we become more loving, we become more like Jesus. I'm just thinking of that second reading from Ephesians, which is a lovely reading. Where is it? So, brothers and sisters, be careful then how you live. Not as unwise people, but as wise. But I think Julian would say, if you can get that love, you will live beautifully anyway. And then there's that first reading from Proverbs about wisdom, which I don't really understand, to be honest. It's a bit sort of odd, isn't it? But it does come at the end. It says, lay aside immaturity. Lay aside immaturity and live and walk in the way of insight. So, the more we can get the notion that we're loved, the more loving we become. It's so important to see it that way. And the world so needs us. The world so needs us, so needs Jesus. Of course, they don't really get that, but the world so needs us, so needs people, individuals, so needs organisations, churches that mirror that love, that mirror that unconditional love that Julian of Norwich talks about. I mean, we just have to think about Gaza, for example, and all the stuff that goes on there. And I'm not going to mention any names because we have to be careful about not being too political. But how can people, how can leaders be so hateful to cause so much suffering? It's unbelievable, isn't it, sometimes, when you think about that. Think about Yemen. We don't hear much about Yemen. But actually I was seeing something yesterday from UNICEF about children in Yemen and the awful time that children in Yemen are having. And the fact that people are been thrown out of their homes. How can people be so hateful to cause so much suffering? Think of Ukraine, another situation. How can leaders be so hateful to cause so much pain, so much destruction, so much lack of love? I was just saying to Sadler and Linda, we're allowed to move. As you know, I think at the minute we're living in Great Whittington, near Corbridge, and we've been there longer than we've been anywhere else, actually. And we're just about to move, and the whole process, I'm sure people who've moved here think, oh gosh, it's moving. it really is a pain. And you have so much stuff to collect together, and you think, how have we got all this stuff together? And I think, it's so awful. And then I think of people in Gaza, and I think it makes me want to cry. Suddenly they're told, leave your houses because we're going to bomb your neighbourhood. And they go, and then they come back later on and there's nothing there. Everything that is there is gone. What am I complaining about? Goodness me, I'm only just moving to Heaton actually, so we should be up the road. But it's just awful what goes on elsewhere and how people lose their homes. Such a mess. And certainly Gaza or Yemen or the Ukraine doesn't feel anything like God's kingdom. God's kingdom of love and peace and justice and joy. God's kingdom which we pray for every time we say the Lord's Prayer. Your kingdom come, we pray. Thy kingdom come, we pray. And where is that kingdom? Sometimes we get glimpses, but you look elsewhere and you think, what? So just thinking about all of this, I want to read to you something that means so much to me. And this is written by somebody called Rachel Evans. What she writes is this. She says, Jesus didn't talk much about the church. You won't find that about the church in the New Testament. But he talks a lot about the kingdom. And in contrast to every other kingdom that has been and ever will be, totally different, his sort of kingdom. Jesus said that this kingdom, his kingdom, belongs to the poor, to the peacemakers, to the merciful, to those who hunger and thirst for God. In his kingdom, in this kingdom, the people from the margins and the bottom rungs will be lifted up to places of honour, seated at the best spots in the table. In this kingdom, in his kingdom, unlike the kingdoms we know around the world, this kingdom knows no geographic boundaries, no political parties, no single language or culture. It advances this kingdom not through power and might, but through acts of love and joy and peace, missions of mercy and kindness and generosity and willingness to compromise and humility. And this kingdom, God's kingdom, Jesus' kingdom, arrived not with a trumpet sound, but with a baby's cry. Not with the vanquishing of enemies, but with the forgiving of them. Not on the back of a war horse, but on the back of a donkey. Not with triumph and conquest, but with a death and a resurrection. Wow. And then she goes on to say, when we consider all the messes the church has made throughout history, and let's be honest, the church is not anything like the pure thing we like to think it is. When we think of the messes of the church has made throughout history, all the havoc she has wreaked and the things she has destroyed, when we face up to just how different the church looks from God's kingdom most of the time. Sometimes, I know churches say, what? How possibly do you mirror God's kingdom in what you are and what you do? And we make a mess of it sometimes. It's easy to think maybe Jesus left us with a raw deal. But the word for church, ecclesia, that's the Greek, was used at the time of Jesus to refer to the people of God, to you, to me, to us together, assembled together as we are today. So church, essentially, this is what church is a gathering of kingdom citizens called out from their individuality, from their sins, from their old ways of doing things, from the world's way of doing things, into a participation in this new kingdom and community with one another. And so, the purpose of the church, this is the key thing, the purpose of the church, our purpose, and of our sacraments, of the sacraments, is to give the world a glimpse of God's kingdom, to point people in the direction of God's kingdom, to mirror his kingdom of love and joy and peace, blah, blah. So, there you go. God's kingdom then is about union and communion, which means that it's also about mercy and about forgiveness and about non-violence and about letting go and about solidarity and service and lives of love, patience and simplicity. Totally unlike other kingdoms. That's what God's kingdom is about. Who can doubt that this is the sum and substance of Jesus' teaching? In the reign of God, the very motives for rivalry and greed and violence have been destroyed. We know we're all part of God's beloved community. Here together, we are part of that beloved community, so loved. So finally, Jesus said, if you want to be children of God, you need to be engaged in peacemaking. If you want to imitate God and be God's children, you have to love your enemies and to pray for those who persecute you. If you want to resist evil, do not use evil methods. You have to practice forgiveness and negotiation and reconciliation. You, as Jesus said, must be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Wow. There's a big challenge for us today. Do you want to be children of God? That is the question. Do I want to be a child of God? Of course we do. Of course we do. So, in that case, please, whatever you do, whatever I do, whether as individuals or as a church, please, please, please be sure to try and try again to mirror God's kingdom in a world which needs us so much. Amen.